As I'll definitely say in a little bit, and probably even more later, I'm cutting this one down to the wire. Lots of dumb reasons as to why. Nothing really that substantial, but it just means that week 7 was awesome, but did happen a few days ago. So we're going to jog our memory. It was not quite as green in terms of our predicteds. We're going to see a lot of people who over and a lot of people who went under, which is kind of back to where we were near the start of the year. So we'll see how that pans out. But enough of me, because I got to get this off before the Thursday kickoff or get real close to trying. So let's jump into a couple things I had to say about week 7 before we get to our scores. For no particularly good reason, this is the latest I'm ever going to be and the closest to the wire. In fact, I hope I get it out just before kickoff on Thursday. I've had the week off. I have no excuse. But one thing I can do to help this process is, even though I like this little segment, I think being a little bit pickier with my storylines and trying to be as quick as I can might be to my advantage. So I do write down a ton when I watch these games, and I did watch a lot of the games this week, as I said, on break, so Monday morning, this is what I did. I wrote down a ton, and I tried to think of maybe just one narrative I could go with on this one. I didn't really know where to go. I was going to go Tom Brady because I actually listened to that game, and to hear him kind of speak. I don't know if anyone's heard the podcast that you can get through AI when you just put in stuff and they've put in like a dialogue that AI generates. But that's kind of Tom Brady as he's reporting. It's very weird, and the words don't always make sense. He's lived his entire life in football, and he says red area and not red zone, which is like kind of a term in football. I thought he would know. He also then they did the Mahomes and Brady back and forth interview that, like, that's edited to make it look good, and it looked like two people that just didn't know how to talk to each other. It's like, remember that time when I said that thing? And they're like, yeah. But instead of Brady, maybe I'll wait till a little bit later. I feel like that one might pop up, especially since he's now, essentially involved with a football team. That means he can't actually do the job that he's getting paid a record amount of money to do. So I guess good on you there. I was going to go to maybe like a positive story. Josh Jacobs caught his 211th pass, which is the most number of passes without a touchdown. But obviously, if I'm talking about this, number 211 was for a touchdown, so positive story. But there's not much more to say there. I could go more about the Chiefs, but I kind of feel like they're going to come up later. They're still undefeated. Instead, I'm going to kick an old tire and go maybe in the fan reaction. We had a very, maybe I think, appropriate fan reaction, and then questionable fan reaction this week. The questionable is if you know much about Saquon Barkley. He did turn down some guaranteed money from the Giants, but it wasn't a great contract offer. And he went with the Eagles instead. And this was his FU game to go back into New York. And he just crushes them. Now, he got booed, and that's not exactly surprising, but it is odd. I mean, all evidence to suggest he was a pretty good guy. I mean, he could have set his personal record. He was 13, I think, yards shy, and there's a pretty viral clip now going with the coach saying, do you want to stay in and get your 13 yards? I was going to put other people in because we're kicking the living snot out of the Giants. And he actually said, yeah, let the younger guys eat. Let them get in there. I don't need my personal best. I've already kind of proven my point. And this is to a team that kind of lowballed him, and or I guess depending on injuries, maybe you thought appropriate, but, great that you boo the player, but remember, I know people in my dad's generation especially, it's like these players making so much money. And yeah, they are, but they only have a couple years to do it. Running backs only last 2.5 years on average. Now, Barkley's lasted longer than that, obviously, but this is the money he has to make for most of the rest of his life. He is a little bit more famous, so maybe he gets that TV deal after, but they have such a short window. I don't blame them for trying to get as much as they can. Why not boo the billionaire owner who's done really nothing recently to help their team out, signing a quarterback that may be kind of questionable? I know they drafted him and they got stubborn. I think a very common denominator, especially even in the next story, that rich people don't like to admit that they might have made a bad decision, so they just double down on it. So they re-signed Daniel Jones, who really only had kind of one stretch that they could really benefit off of recently, and they doubled down on him. They've kind of mismanagement, and I mean, it's not like they're like synonymous. I mean, the Mara family, and if you're thinking Kate Mara, actress, and Mara Rooney, that's their family. They have the Steelers and the Giants ownership in their background. I mean, Mara bought it in 1925 for $500, and then gave it to his kids when the stock market crashed because they didn't want it as like a tax deficit. Now worth $7.3 billion. So a lot of inherited wealth here, and certainly a very good investment, but doesn't make them phenomenal at what they do. And if you're going to boo anyone, why not boo them? The people running the team have not been doing an awesome job, but very rarely do billionaires put themselves at center field when their team's not doing well. It's only when they win that they tend to show up. So weird how that happens. But I thought that was an odd fan reaction versus Maybe a more appropriate one. I know it's really hard, and I've kicked this tire so many times with Cleveland. Sorry, it is my team, but it also is a very interesting story. One I don't really want to talk too much about, but if you saw the injury, I mean, here in Thailand, I'm starting to dream of like snakes. I have like kind of a weird, I don't want to see them around, and I know I'm going to because I know they're around here. I went most of my Kenyan life not having to bump into too many of them, but it kind of gives me the ick factor. And I say that in the same way as whenever I see someone step back aggressively, I think I'm just getting to that age where I'm worried this is going to happen to me. But as soon as you don't need to hear the pop, you see the pop and the calf shoot into the sock. You know exactly what happened. Just the Achilles of it is a little bit frightening. But it happens to a guy that not only is playing terribly, but obviously morally is not the easiest to support. And I think the weird thing is the fans are getting beef for their reaction. And I get it if you're a player and a teammate and you know the guy, I guess, but that is just the worst person to defend. And yet you go on record, some of his teammates throwing out comments like he's actually a good guy most of the time. You're like, yeah, but when he wasn't, it was pretty illegal and pretty indefensible. I mean, put it this way, if you know anything about the history of these players, the fact that Jameis Winston's coming in and he is the best moral decision at quarterback is shocking if you remember anything that happened in FSU. So I don't really know if we can judge the fans for their reaction on that one. Cleveland isn't known for being the most intelligent fan base in the world, and I say that as among them, and have sat in the crowd. And yeah, the comments aren't always the greatest. But in this particular case, I don't think we can be too mad at the fans. Maybe it's just people get tired of cheering for someone or being forced to try and make that decision. Can I cheer for a jersey and a piece of laundry without cheering for the person wearing it? Again, this is supposed to be fun, and that wasn't super fun. So, round 2, let's see how the Browns do in that case, but I'll find something else to talk about next week. Anyway, hopefully that was short enough that I can get this finished in time. Now let's get on to our scores. 134 is our high for the week, which was a little bit lower than some of our highs in the past. But like I said, this week was not off the charts. However, we can say this was predicted to be quite a close matchup. Yahoo Predicteds did not have a great week because Horst massively over and Whalen went massively under. Just to speak to Whalen quickly, your wide receivers were kind of your strength in this case. Not all, obviously, but you still got some points across the board. You did get Evans get hurt, but at least he got the touchdown first. Wilson did all right, and obviously Brown was there. Unfortunately for you, the best wide receiver you had was on your bench. Brian Thomas Jr. was our wide receiver 4. Aside from that, though, you really had massive underperformances at running back, especially considering I thought Dobbins would have a massive week. Didn't really work out for you, and Denver kind of controlled New Orleans on that one, so that wasn't a great start for you. You weren't going to win a whole lot, though, with 75, so, I mean, at least you got some of them out of the way, because Stroud's performance was about his worst, I think. On the flip side of that coin, Allen just missed our top 5. He was our quarterback 6, but Pickens, wide receiver 3, maybe with Russell Wilson, who was our quarterback 3, and no one took him. Maybe this is a sign of new things, because your wide receivers were quite solid. In general, even in one in your flex did quite well. Seattle was one of your few things that busted its way into the top 5. It was the defensive 5, and you did have Pickens, like I said, at 3. Other than that, you just had solid performances, and that includes, I'm just checking out your basement here, not a whole lot, so you made all the right decisions. Monty was a bit of a scare for you. He went out early. He did come back and get a few more yards, but unfortunately, they used him a lot in pass coverage because Gibbs had a monster day, which we'll talk about in a bit. But you didn't need him. 134 was our top score, and obviously that bodes well for you in our extremely tight race. That bumped you up a little bit. You are now top 3 horse, so hey, well done, buddy. In continuing our trend of someone going over, someone going under, V, congratulations. You had our second highest score of the week, and that obviously helped you out in your playoff race. Ben, unfortunately, 93 is not going to cut it in this particular week. How things went wrong for you. Now, you did get your Chubb back, so that's probably pretty good, and your defense was the second best defense. But that's about it. You definitely had some okay performances, and no one really just tanked. Although Ayuk getting hurt certainly was a cumbersome for you. You just didn't really have that steady contribution of points. Whereas you look at the flip side of the coin, V didn't have that many people necessarily covet the top 5 spots. In fact, his running backs did not get into the top 5, but you're going to take that if you can get 40 points out of your 2 starting running backs. I think most people would be just fine with that. Now, you did have your QB as your QB4 in Hurts, but you also had some underperformances. Obviously, Pollard was disappointing. Zay Flowers was a huge part of their early offensive plan. He was definitely involved in their first series. And then he got hurt, so that was not something you were obviously looking towards. If we look at our bench, you guys did have a few points there. You got to be loving Cooper on Buffalo, actually going with a team that can throw the ball. So all of a sudden, you might have a little bit of depth here, V, which, well-timed. You're now currently, if the league were to end today, in the playoffs. Ben, only a game out, so still in the fight. Jazz, you deserved a little bit better here because you actually had some people cracking the top 5. Murray was the quarterback 5. DK Metcalf, although he got a little bit hurt, was doing quite well. You got to love Andrews is coming along recently. Maybe that injury report is accurate in saying he just needed a few more weeks to get his crap together. He was our tight end 3. And getting 14 points out of your defense is obviously something you want. Getting the bagel at flex was not great for you, and you didn't really have too many other options, though. You do have kind of that commando basement right now with all of your injuries. Although now Chicago's back from the bye week and Kupp might be coming back, so you could be a force to reckon with. Now you're a few games out of it, but I think we know enough that if you go on that run, it's not outside of your reach quite yet. Jake, you had a great week. You got to be pretty bummed about Godwin going out because it looks like he might be gone for a bit here. But St. Brown was our wide receiver 1. Gibbs was our running back 1, and Mixon our running back 4. Also, probably right now, if I was to give midseason awards, Mixon is probably the steal of the draft. He was available for everybody. He passed a bunch of rounds, and he is one of the highest scoring running backs of the year so far. You're someone else, too, who didn't have a whole lot, although Bucky Irving has certainly proved to be a great addition, which is odd here because White also had a great week, but maybe they're proving that in that particular game, as long as you can score, 30 plus points, maybe a lot of people get a lot of the love. We'll get to Baker in a little bit. So Jake, congrats. You're the top 2 right now, 5-2. You're going to stand out from a lot of the pack here. And like I said, Chaz, it's not too late, and you do have some people giving you some needed help this week. B, congrats, you did it. You took down the top dog. Now, he didn't lose his top spot because he's been a high-scoring team, but he wasn't super high this week, and you did exceed predicted. I said we would get to Baker, and now we're getting to Baker. He was our quarterback 2 on the week, although your wide receivers just sucked all the butts. So that was it was good that you had this matchup because those are obviously 2 receivers that have been producing for the most part. Just not this week. Your running backs did save you a little bit with Bijan and Walker coming through because your kicker, who's been just a phenomenal kicker choice, did not necessarily come out this week. Atlanta was not the powder keg a lot of people thought they might be. Mark, you did have the running back 2 in Henry, and he had that monster game, and even Jones had a great game. Not a top 5, but a top 10. But you did have the Debo injury. You had Adams not having the game that a lot of people were hoping he'd have when all of a sudden his hamstring just felt so much better that he could go in. Richardson's really proven to be a divisive one for you because, he's certainly not doing what I think most of us thought he was going to do this year. Turns out throwing the ball is a little bit harder for him than he thought, and they don't want him to take many hits. Don't know if that changes or not. You took a gamble on the Jets kind of game in general, not just your wide receiver, but in your defense, and that didn't pay off for you. So B, a rare commando win. You had an empty basement, but you got everyone coming back. This was all bye weeks. Mark, you did have some points on the bench, but nothing that was going to really help you out to an extent this week, although the 13 probably would have been nice, and that would have made this closer, because this week, I don't know if you've noticed, we didn't have a lot of super close matchups. But Mark, you held on to your top spot still, so all is not lost. And B, this was a huge win for you. Jumps you into the top 4. Sometimes you score 120 and you lose, and sometimes you score 108 and you win. So thank you, Justin, for not going off. I would have just beaten your Yahoo predicteds, and you had some people who had me sweating. Lamar Jackson was our QB1. Barkley was our running back 2. So if I looked at just them, and obviously your kicker did quite well with 17. That was a solid performance overall, although it did not technically crack. Actually, sorry, it was our kicker 3. I wrote down the wrong number there. But your wide receivers honked, and you didn't have the depth, and you certainly didn't have any help in your tight end spot. Your bench, okay, didn't have a whole lot there either, so it's not like that would have been a massive difference, although the 7 points would have certainly made me sweating had you put him in for Smith. For me, my biggest problem, injuries and a crappy Miami team. Now, Tua coming back. Let's see what that happens for Hill, but he didn't have a great week. Daniels getting knocked out is certainly scary. Now, I do have some depth on the bench, but luckily for me, the tank was a tank in Jacksonville. I put him in, and Kareem Hunt did just well for me. And, I mean, realistically, I had the best defense, which was awesome. So my wide receivers honked. My defense and my running backs did enough to get me through. And like I said, a win is a win. Justin, you're hanging on to the playoff spot here due to your high-scoring nature, but teams like me that are tied with you are certainly looking to take you down this week. So let's see how that pans out. As I mentioned, lots of ties, so 3 and 4 get you as high as 5 and as low as 9, whereas we have 2 teams alone on top here at 5 and 2, but we see the point differential is not that drastic, and the White Rhinos and B are certainly knocking on the door here. So it's really going to come down to matchups in week 8. Now, we don't have any buys, so this should be a more normal matchup, but we do have a lot of injuries, obviously. So let's see. I did just compliment Chaz in terms of the injuries that he have, starting to maybe not in the McCaffrey way, but he's certainly getting cut back and he's off of a bye week. So we'll see when he puts all his guys in what that looks like. Obviously, this is going to be a tight matchup, or it looks like it. This one's predicted down to a point. But I think if we learn anything, predicteds, schmedicteds. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen here. I would say the tie kind of battle here between Jake and V might be end up being important with 2 playoff teams, and obviously down here 2 playoffs as well. Let's be honest, we're still in that mix. No one's completely out of it, and no one's clinched it yet, so the next couple weeks are going to be key. Fat boys, there you have it. Now we know the landscape of what we're looking into for week 8. Like I said, if you're watching this, kickoff may have already happened, but hopefully I'm going to get it under the wire. We're back to no bye weeks. We're back to no European games, so it's a more normal and functional schedule, at least for another week or 2 before we start mixing things up again. So as I said, we're right in the heart of it. This is technically our mid-season. We are now halfway done our regular season. So if you're going to go on a run, now's the time. Good luck, everyone.